It's funny when we think about like upgrading a business or an entire economy, there's this deeply ingrained expectation of visible
You're
mechanics.
right. Yeah. Like you want to see the gears turning.
Exactly. Think about a factory floor. If a manufacturer wants to build more cars, the process is super tangible. They speed up the conveyor belt, they install a bigger motor.
Maybe widen the loading dock or something.
Yeah, exactly. And the foreman can just point to the new machinery and say, boom, we've increased throughput by 10%. Because, I mean, we like progress to be made of steel. We like to watch it happen.
It's comforting, right? It provides this very comforting linear equation. Capital input yields a predictable physical output.
Right.
You can basically audit a faster motor just by looking at it.
But, and here's the thing, when you step into the modern knowledge economy, that physical conveyor belt just vanishes.
Completely.
We're operating in this landscape where the primary engines of productivity, the workflows, the data processing, the cognitive handoffs, they're entirely invisible.
Yeah, you can't just stand on a catwalk and watch an inefficient algorithm bottleneck your quarter.
Right, and that invisible friction is, well, it's the core of what we are unpacking today. Welcome to the deep dive, by the way.
Thanks for having me.
So today our mission is basically to act as a shortcut for you, the listener, to get completely well-informed on this massive shift happening right now. We're looking at a huge release of data from May 2026.
Yeah, the new dashboards from the McKinsey Global Institute, MGI.
Right, the MGI reports. It's a forensic breakdown of the European AI roadmap, and it's all about how artificial intelligence and robotics are fundamentally reorganizing the future of work.
Which is a huge topic.
It is. But before we get into the taxonomy of it all, I really want to anchor us to the macro number here because it's wild. $1.9 trillion.
It's a staggering valuation.
Yeah, that is the potential economic value on the table for Europe by 2030. Just a massive prize.
It is, but, there is a massive condition attached to that 1.9 trillion.
Right, it's not guaranteed.
Exactly. That capital is only unlocked if leaders, workers, and institutions fundamentally shift their mental model. Like, they have to stop viewing AI as a tool for job replacement.
Which is totally the legacy mindset, right? Like, the robots are coming for my job.
Right, exactly. They have to stop that and start treating it as a tool for comprehensive workflow redesign.
Well, let's explore that condition, because getting from where we are today to that 1.9 trillion midpoint scenario, it isn't just about, downloading a new software update.
No, not at all.
I was looking at the demographic data driving this report, specifically for the EU10. Those 10 economies that make up, what, 3/4 of the region's GDP?
Yeah, about 75%.
Right. And when you read the mainstream headlines, AI is usually framed as this profit maximization tool, a way to cut costs, boost margins. But this data paints a much darker picture.
It really does.
It looks less like an aggressive growth strategy and more like an economic emergency protocol.
Because it absolutely is an emergency protocol. I mean, what's fascinating here is that we are looking at a region facing unprecedented demographic headwinds.
The shrinking population.
Exactly. Europe has a shrinking and rapidly aging population. The dependency ratio, the number of retirees relying on the economic output of active workers, it's reaching a breaking point.
Which is terrifying if you're managing a national budget.
Right. You have chronic structural labor shortages across critical sectors. The traditional levers that European economies have relied on since the post-war period are just tapped out.
That can't just expand the workforce because the people literally do not exist.
Precisely. The well is dry, and that constraint changes the entire nature of technology adoption. For the EU10, integrating AI is no longer just some discretionary IT upgrade.
It's not a luxury item.
No, it's a macroeconomic mandate. If you have fewer human beings in the labor market, the only mathematical way to sustain living standards and fund pensions is to make the workers you do have exponentially more productive.
So productivity has to basically bridge that demographic gap.
Exactly.
But the MGI reports, they don't just offer that 1.9 trillion scenario as a lock. They contrast it with a gradual scenario, which projects a much lower yield of 1.1 trillion.
Which is a brutal difference.
Yeah, we're talking about an $800 billion delta. Just vanished.
And that 800 billion difference is what they call the value gap. It's critical to understand what that gap actually represents because it's not a lack of technological capability.
Wait, really? So we already have the tech?
Oh, absolutely. The technology required to hit the 1.9 trillion mark already exists today in 2026. That 800 billion is the direct measurable cost of organizational inertia.
Wow. So it's literally just the penalty for moving slowly.
Yes, for getting bogged down in departmental silos, regulatory hesitation, failing to reorganize human teams fast enough.
Okay, let me push back on that a bit.
Okay.
Because, it's very easy for a consultancy report to just declare, oh, organizations are moving too slowly, leaving billions on the table.
Fair point.
But we are talking about reorganizing entire societies, healthcare systems, global supply chains. The report cites this 58% figure, that 58% of current work hours in Europe are technically automatable today.
Yeah, the technical automation potential.
Right. But when you're managing a complex, regulated enterprise, overhauling 58% of your operations in 4 years sounds less like innovation and more like, well, systemic collapse.
The hesitation is completely valid, which is why we really need to rigorously define what that 58% actually means.
Okay, break it down for me.
So MGI terms this a theoretical ceiling. It's based on the raw mathematical capabilities of current AI. It means if you isolated every single task in the economy and asked, can a 2026 machine execute this? The answer is yes, for 58% of hours worked.
Right, but executing a task in a lab is way different from deploying it in a messy real-world business.
Precisely. The 58% is not a forecast of mass unemployment. The actual adoption modeled by MGI for 2030 is drastically lower.
What are we looking at?
Somewhere between 15 and 25%.
Okay, that's a huge drop from 58.
It is, and the distance between that theoretical potential and the actual adoption is governed by friction.
Let's unpack that friction. Because if you're an executive trying to get a piece of that 1.9 trillion, understanding what slows you down is just as important as the tech itself.
Right. So economic friction takes a few forms. First, the relative cost of tech versus human labor. Even if a machine can do a task, a human might still be cheaper right now.
Especially in lower wage sectors, I'd imagine.
Exactly. Then you have the capital expenditure, buying the software, upgrading the data infrastructure. And beyond economics, there is immense regulatory friction.
Oh, I bet. European data sovereignty laws, GDPR compliance.
Algorithmic transparency mandates, yes. All of these slow down deployment.
Not to mention labor laws and union negotiations. Europe has a very deep social safety net. You can't just flip a switch and replace a unionized workforce with a software suite.
No, that's a multi-year negotiation process. And the final form of friction is human change management. Just the sheer time it takes to retrain a manager to trust a predictive algorithm.
Or teaching a whole department to change a 20-year-old process.
Exactly. So the objective for a leader isn't to recklessly chase that 58% ceiling. It's to efficiently navigate the friction to capture that realistic 15 to 25% now, so they don't fall into the $800 billion trap.
Okay, so if that 800 billion gap is the cost of moving slow, it forces a very practical question. Moving slow on what exactly?
Right. What is doing the labor?
Yeah. If we're automating 15 to 25% of the workload, we have to look at the tools. And this is where the MGI taxonomy completely upends the traditional narrative.
It really does.
Because if you ask the average person on the street to define automation, they always describe hardware.
Oh, absolutely. It's the enduring legacy of science fiction, you know? We conceptualize automation as a robotic arm welding a chassis or an android carrying boxes in a warehouse.
But the data in this report reveals something completely different. MGI splits automation into two decoupled categories.
Right.
Agents and robots.
The digital brain versus the physical muscle.
Exactly. And the taxonomy dictates where the capital is flowing.
Right. Robots operate in the physical environment. They augment human motor skills. Agents, conversely, operate entirely within the digital environment.
So cognitive workloads, natural language processing, unstructured data synthesis, that kind of thing.
Exactly. Predictive forecasting and complex coordination.
And when you look at how that $1.9 trillion prize is split between those two, the numbers are just staggering. Agents account for a massive 82% of the potential economic value.
It's incredible.
$1.56 trillion driven entirely by digital agents. Meanwhile, robots, the physical machines we're culturally conditioned to obsess over, they only account for 18%.
The 82-18 split is a total paradigm shift. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, the reason agents dwarf physical robotics comes down to the fundamental nature of the modern European economy.
Which is mostly non-physical work now, right?
Yes. 2/3 of all work hours in the EU10 are dedicated to non-physical activities. The lifeblood of the economy isn't heavy lifting anymore.
It's information processing.
Exactly. Stakeholder coordination, strategic planning, data analysis.
Which means the tools designed to automate non-physical work have the largest addressable market.
Right.
But even knowing that, there was this one specific data point in the sector breakdown that totally threw me. I looked at manufacturing.
Ah, yeah, the
Yeah.
71% stat.
Yes, you would assume that in a physically intensive industry like manufacturing, that 18% robot figure would spike. But MGI projects that even in manufacturing, 71% of the value comes from agents. How does a digital brain drive 71% of the value in a sector that literally builds physical objects?
Because manufacturing an object in 2026 involves an absolute iceberg of invisible cognitive coordination. Think about a product's life cycle. Before a robotic arm even touches a piece of metal.
There's a ton of planning.
Exactly. Global supply chain logistics, predictive modeling of raw material costs, vendor sourcing, compliance documentation.
Right, the logistics of getting the metal to the factory at the exact right moment and price, that's entirely non-physical.
Yes. And after it's built, you have quality control, distribution routing, predictive maintenance for the machines themselves. That is all cognitive work.
So the robotic arm just does the final physical step.
Basically, yeah. But a network of AI agents orchestrated the delivery, analyzed the weld integrity with computer vision, and logged the compliance data.
And there's also a vast difference in the deployment speed, right? Like scaling physical robotics requires immense upfront capital expenditure.
Huge capex. You have to physically build the machine, ship it, reinforce the factory floor, wire it.
Yeah, the implementation cycles are measured in years,
Mm-hmm.
but deploying a software agent, that's just an operational expenditure that scales almost instantly once it's validated.
The barrier to entry is infinitely lower for agents.
So if you're listening to this and you spent the last few years worrying about a Boston Dynamics robot walking into your office and taking your physical job, you might be looking the wrong way.
You're definitely looking the wrong way.
The real economic revolution is happening invisibly. It's happening inside your inbox, your spreadsheets, your planning software.
Which means leaders and workers have to fundamentally recalibrate. You aren't managing physical throughput anymore. You are managing digital orchestration.
And that leads directly to how we classify the human beings doing the work.
Yeah.
If agents are driving the change, we have to understand exactly who will be interacting with them.
Right, which brings us to the archetypes.
Yes. One of the strongest directives in the MGI report is that HR departments need to abandon the concept of job titles entirely. They say we need to start managing by work archetypes.
Because a traditional job title, like a senior marketing analyst, is output-oriented. It tells the organization what you deliver, but offers zero insight into how you spend your hours delivering it.
It's moving from the what to the how.
Exactly. MGI deconstructs the workforce into 7 distinct work archetypes based on task execution.
Let's break these down because this is where the abstract economics hit the actual desk. The first major category is the people-centric archetype. That's about 31% of the European workforce.
Right. Roles like nurses, general managers, social workers.
What's the core of that archetype?
The defining characteristic is that the core value relies on high stakes, human judgment, deep empathy, and a complex social adaptability.
So they might use AI, but it's not replacing them.
Exactly. A nurse will absolutely use an agent to auto-generate patient charts. But the irreducible core of the job remains human-to-human interaction. Their exposure to direct automation is incredibly low.
Okay, then you move it to the hybrid roles, which is a combined 27%. This includes people agent, people robot, stuff like that. We're talking teachers, salespeople, plumbers.
Hybrid roles are defined by a partnership model. The human is central, but the subtasks are handed off to tech.
Like a plumber diagnosing pipes with an agent, but physically fixing it themselves.
Or a teacher. The empathy and guidance remain human, but the grading and lesson planning are agentic.
Got it. And finally, the third group, the AI-centric roles. This is massive, 42% of the workforce, accountants, junior software developers, welders.
This is the zone of highest exposure. These roles consist of highly codified tasks where the tech will soon perform the vast majority of the core work.
So if your job is mostly taking unstructured data, structuring it, and passing it along.
An agent can do that infinitely faster. The human role shifts violently away from manual execution towards system oversight and exception handling.
And here is where the data gets super actionable. The epicenter of this transition isn't spread evenly. It's hyper-concentrated in 2 specific archetypes.
The battleground.
Yes, the people-agent hybrid group, which is 21%, and the agent-centric group, which is 30%. Combined, that is 51% of the workforce, over half.
That 51% is where the battle for productivity will be won or lost. How fast you reskill those specific millions of workers dictates everything.
You know, I noticed a really fascinating regional quirk in this archetype data. The report compares the EU workforce to the US.
Ah, the 3% difference.
Yeah. Europe actually has a slightly lower share of people-centric roles in the US.
Yeah.
It's 31% in Europe versus 34% in the US. It's tiny, but MGI points out it has a big downstream effect.
It does. It's rooted in the structural history of the two economies. The U.S. has transitioned aggressively into a heavy service-based economy, creating more human-to-human roles.
And Europe.
Europe has retained a denser core of administrative, regulatory, and industrial coordination roles.
Which falls squarely into the agent-centric and hybrid categories.
Exactly, which is precisely why Europe actually has a marginally higher overall automation potential than the U.S. 58% versus 57%.
Because their workforce is highly concentrated in roles ripe for agentic productivity gains.
It's a structural vulnerability, but also the exact reason that 1.9 trillion is disproportionately accessible to them.
If they execute the transition, right. But capturing that prize comes down to the individual human sitting at the desk in that 51% battleground.
Skills. It all comes down to skills.
Yes. If your archetype determines how you work, your skills determine if you succeed. The reports introduce a metric here called the Skill Change Index, or SCI.
It's a critical evolution. Previously, we looked at automation through job loss. Will the accountant lose their job? The SCI looks at automation at the granular level of individual skills.
Because jobs rarely disappear entirely, the bundle of skills just changes.
Exactly.
The SCI breaks current skills into 3 buckets. First, AI-led skills, which is about 15%. Routine data entry, standard machine operation.
Those are fully absorbed into automated systems. The enterprise will not pay a premium for a human to do that anymore.
Then you have people-led skills, which make up surprisingly little, only 10%.
Yeah.
High-level empathy, leadership, the human final mile.
Right.
But the revelation is the middle bucket. 75% of the skills employers rely on right now are classified as shared.
Shared skills include complex problem solving, strategic writing, contextual research. They're necessary for both automatable and non-automatable work.
So what does this all mean for the listener? If you're wondering how secure your career path is, this 75% metric should totally reframe your anxiety.
It changes the whole narrative.
Right, because the narrative is usually, I'm in a race against the machine.
Mm-hmm.
But the SCI data proves you aren't being replaced, you're entering a skill partnership.
A human-machine partnership.
Yeah. I was trying to conceptualize how this feels in an office, and I thought of this analogy. Imagine your company suddenly assigns you an intern.
Oh, okay, an intern.
But this intern is lightning fast. They've read literally every book ever published, can process 10 million rows of data in 4 seconds, and speaks every language on Earth.
Sounds like a profoundly powerful resource.
It is. But here's the catch. This brilliant intern has absolutely zero common sense, no ethical grounding, no understanding of office politics, and no cultural awareness.
Right, they can't read the room.
Exactly. So if you're managing this intern, you don't fire yourself because the intern types faster than you. Your entire job shifts to guiding them, defining parameters, fact-checking their output, and applying human context to their raw speed.
That is a highly accurate way to visualize it. And the skill required to manage that brilliant but context-blind intern is what MGI defines as AI fluency.
AI fluency.
Yes. And it's perhaps the most important distinction in the 2026 data. We have to separate technical AI expertise from AI fluency.
Which is a huge relief. Because when people hear they need AI skills, the immediate panic is, I don't know how to code in Python, I'm obsolete.
And that panic is completely misplaced. Technical AI expertise is for the engineers building the foundational models, the data scientists.
Which is a very small percentage of the workforce.
Very small. AI fluency, conversely, is the practical day-to-day ability to use, manage, and iterate with AI systems in a workflow.
It's the difference between knowing how to build an engine and knowing how to drive the car.
Exactly. Fluency is knowing how to construct a complex prompt, evaluating an agent's response for hallucinations or bias, understanding when to escalate to a human.
And the hiring data MGI pulled on this is incredibly clear. Since 2023, demand for technical AI skills grew by 1.7 times. But demand for AI fluency, it's grown by 5 times.
A massive exponential surge.
And it's outside of STEM. HR compliance officers, supply chain coordinators, everyone needs fluency.
Which exposes a severe crisis in corporate learning and development.
How so?
Because if a company has a technical bottleneck, they can solve it with capital. Hire a boutique firm, license a model, But you cannot buy AI fluency off the shelf.
Right, because fluency isn't a software patch, it's a behavioral change.
It's entirely behavioral. Fluency bottlenecks can only be solved with culture, continuous education, and aggressive training across the existing workforce.
So if everyone needs fluency, and companies are hiring for it at 5 times the rate, we should be seeing a massive economic boom.
You would think so.
The profit should be rolling in. But this leads to the biggest hurdle in the transition. MGI highlights what they call the AI paradox.
The ROI problem.
Yes, nearly 90% of European companies report they use AI, but fewer than 40% report any measurable ROI. How is that possible?
Yep.
We just spent half an hour talking about how powerful these agents are. If 90% are using it, why aren't they seeing profits?
This raises an important question about how work is historically structured. The bottleneck causing this paradox is the legacy workflow. MGI argues companies are falling victim to task-level incrementalism.
Task-level incrementalism. Walk me through exactly what that looks like.
Okay, so imagine an organization takes highly advanced 2026 AI and layers it directly on top of an inefficient pre-digital workflow.
Okay.
Let's visualize a bureaucratic process. A financial approval requires 5 distinct handoffs between 5 departments and takes 3 days because it sits in an inbox at each stage.
The classic corporate bottleneck.
Now, imagine the company buys an expensive AI agent for the person at step 2. They finish their task in 1 hour instead of 3. The company claims they've adopted AI.
But the overall approval still takes 3 days.
Exactly. Because the file still gets stuck in the inbox at step 3. They haven't reduced headcount. They haven't delivered faster. They just sped up one isolated segment of a broken process.
They optimized a local node, but the network is still throttled. It's like putting a high-speed bullet train on 19th century wooden tracks.
That is the perfect way to frame it.
You can run the engine as fast as you want, but you're just going to derail the whole system.
Right. To capture actual ROI, executives must abandon task-level incrementalism and move to collapsing handoffs,
Moving from execution to orchestration.
eradicating the dead time between tasks.
The reports give some great examples of collapsing handoffs. The one that stood out to me was the medical writer at a pharmaceutical company.
A brilliant case study. In the legacy workflow, the writer received a mountain of raw clinical data and spent weeks manually drafting regulatory documents.
Deeply tedious execution work.
Exactly. Task-level incrementalism would just give them an AI grammar checker to type slightly faster.
But under the redesigned workflow, an agentic AI is fed the raw data and produces the initial draft in seconds. The drafting phase is collapsed.
But crucially, the writer isn't fired. Their role elevates. They transition into an editor-in-chief.
Because the intern still lacks regulatory intuition.
Precisely. The writer now focuses entirely on high-order quality assurance and clinical judgment, the human final mile. The company gets documents submitted weeks faster, and the human does higher-value work.
There's another great example, the B2B salesperson.
Oh, yes. In the legacy workflow, an account executive spends 60% of their day doing non-revenue generating work. CRM data entry, drafting cold emails, prospecting.
But with a redesigned workflow, agents handle the early prospecting and automatically update the CRM. That 60% of dead time is just gone.
And the economic value unlocks because the salesperson now focuses 100% of their time on relationship strategy and high-stakes negotiation.
Okay, to make this super concrete, let's zoom in geographically. Because Europe isn't a monolith. The MGI country dashboards show how this is playing out right now. Let's start with the Czech Republic.
The Czech Republic is a highly instructive case study. It represents the manufacturing pathway.
Right. Heavy industry, physical production. And they have a massive 64% technical automation potential, well above the 58% EU average.
And 43% of their roles are physically intensive.
So you'd assume, this is where the physical robot revolution is happening. But the paradox strikes again.
It does.
Even with that manufacturing focus, 71% of their potential value, which is like a $33 billion prize, is driven by agents, not robots.
Because even in an auto plant, the real friction is cognitive supply chain logistics, not just attaching the bumper.
Right. But when you dig into their dashboard, there's a massive red flag, the danger zone regarding their skill gap.
Yes. The demand for AI fluency there surged by 4.9 times, tracking the European trend. But their demand for technical AI skills is stagnant at 0.6 times.
MGI calls this the creator-user gap.
Right. They are rapidly accelerating as a consumer of AI, but failing to cultivate the creators necessary to innovate locally.
What does that mean for them over the next decade?
It's a strategic vulnerability. If
Yeah.
you only train people to use foreign tools, you can't tailor models to your sovereign needs, and you cede massive economic value back to the IP creators in the US or Asia.
You become a vassal state to foreign digital infrastructure. That's chilling.
Very much so.
Let's contrast that with Denmark. Their dashboard represents the service pathway. 58% potential, $66 billion value unlocked.
And their profile is led heavily by healthcare and social services, but their fluency demand is growing much slower, only 3.6 times.
And technical skills are flat at 1.2 times.
This suggests a slower pace of adoption due to the friction in the service sector. Healthcare relies on sensitive personal data, increasing GDPR compliance friction.
But remember that $800 billion gap. If Denmark's fluency demand is only 3.6x, they risk slipping into that gradual scenario and leaving billions on the table.
Because organizational inertia in their service sector is too difficult to overcome.
Let's do some rapid-fire regional highlights before we wrap up. Germany is sitting on the largest single prize, $486 billion.
And their fluency demand is skyrocketing. They have a world-class manufacturing core colliding with a severe demographic aging cliff. They literally have no choice.
Then you have the UK, looking at $375 billion. But the country that really jumped out to me was Sweden.
Sweden is the regional vanguard.
Yeah, 27% of their occupations already explicitly require AI skills.
Yeah.
They are functionally bridging that creator-user gap.
Sweden is providing a real-time glimpse into a stabilized, highly integrated post-transition workforce.
Incredible. Well, this has been a massively dense journey today. To summarize, we moved from the 1.9 trillion macroeconomic necessity, right?
Yes.
Debunk the robot myth in favor of digital agents, explore the 7 archetypes, and realize that workflow orchestration and AI fluency are the true keys to survival.
Abandoning task-level incrementalism.
Exactly. So to wrap this up, what is a final provocative thought for our listener to mull over?
Well, if 75% of your skills are now shared with a machine, an intern that has read every book ever written, your unique human value is no longer in what you know.
Wow.
Your value is in your taste, your ethics, and your judgment. As machines get better at providing the answers, the most valuable human skill of the 2030s will simply be the ability to ask the right questions.
The ability to ask the right questions. I love that. So tomorrow morning, take a hard look at your daily workflows. Where can you stop executing and start orchestrating? Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.